Before we dive into today's story, make sure to hit that like button, drop a comment with your favorite moment, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss more of these cinematic HFY tales. It helps us reach more people who love these kinds of stories, and trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. Now, let's begin. The chamber of the Galactic Council was never meant to feel small, but tonight it did. It was a hall of light and towering stone, where thousands of species had gathered over centuries to decide the fate of worlds. Yet the whispers that ran through the chamber were not about trade routes or border disputes. They were about a single word, carried from one corner of the galaxy to another, a word so old that many civilizations dared not speak it aloud. Predator. It had been over a century since the last verified sighting. Entire fleets had gone dark, planets left as scorched husks, and still no one had ever recorded more than a flicker of movement in the void. No treaties had ever been signed with it. No language deciphered. It was not seen as a creature but as an event, a calamity that erased everything it touched. And now reports placed it near the frontier, close to human colonies. Ambassadors shifted uneasily in their seats, their armored escorts gripping ceremonial weapons. A dozen alien species hissed or chittered among themselves, their voices rising in panic as a holofeed replayed the grainy transmission from the Tharnak Armada's last stand. Hundreds of ships vanishing into fire as something vast and serpentine cut through them with impossible speed. Extinction incarnate, whispered a pale-eyed minister from the Gov Collective. His voice shook. It cannot be allowed to spread again. We must exterminate it. The call was echoed by half a dozen others. Threat displays flared, spines rising, mandibles clacking, tendrils twitching. None of them noticed the human representative had not joined in their chorus. Captain Elias Ward leaned forward in his seat, one elbow resting casually on the polished stone desk. His uniform was simple compared to the gilded armor of the others, a crisp navy jacket bearing the insignia of Earth's Exploratory Defense Corps. His dark eyes held no trace of the fear that gripped the chamber. Instead, there was curiosity, as though he were listening to a story told by children. "We've tried extermination before," Elias said, his voice cutting through the chamber like a clean blade. His words carried no raised volume, but the translator nodes embedded in the ceiling broadcast his tone with a human sharpness that seemed alien to them. Dozens of fleets. Entire battle groups. And each time the outcome was the same. Ships gone. Worlds lost. The Predator still standing. Perhaps it's time to stop pretending we understand what it is. 1,000 eyes turned on him at once. Some narrowed in suspicion, others widened in outrage. The Crothy delegate, a towering insectoid wrapped in ceremonial steel, struck the ground with his spear in fury. "You speak as if this thing deserves negotiation. It is a beast. It does not reason. It consumes." Elias met the glare without flinching. "Then explain why it turned away." The chamber fell into uneasy silence. The transmission replayed again, this time ending not with the destruction of the Tharnak ships, but with the Predator drifting past the shattered armada. It had not pursued their escape pods. It had not followed them to their colony world. It had vanished into the dark. Elias rose slowly from his seat, every movement deliberate. His voice carried calm, but beneath it was a weight, the kind that made listeners straighten despite themselves. "Our intelligence reports show something strange. The Predator has crossed human space more than once. Not once has it attacked us. It could have erased every colony between Sirius and Vega. But it didn't. It watched. And then it left." Gasps rippled. Disbelief. Fear. Some muttered about impossible luck, others about conspiracies. Elias ignored them. At his side, another human shifted in his chair, his jaw clenched tight. Lieutenant Marcus Hale was younger, his features sharper, his presence more restless. He was not a diplomat but a soldier, assigned to Elias for protection. And though he said nothing, his eyes scanned the chamber with a Predator's awareness of their own, measuring distance, threat, possibility. The council erupted. Delegates screamed over one another in their languages, translators struggling to keep pace. Some demanded immediate mobilization of every fleet in range. Others shouted that Earth must be hiding something, that humans were colluding with the Predator. One even suggested humanity itself might be a threat to the galaxy if they held sway over such a creature. Elias lifted a hand, calm but firm. "If you strike without understanding, you will only feed the fire. You've seen the transmissions. Fleets do not stop it. Weapons do not stop it. What you call beast, I call survivor. And survivors always have a reason." The chamber broke into chaos again, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Elias sat back down, unshaken, while Marcus leaned toward him, speaking low enough that only he could hear. "You know they're going to ignore you," Marcus muttered. "They want blood. It doesn't matter if it costs them." Elias allowed himself the faintest smile. "I know. But they also want someone to blame when it goes wrong. And that will give us our chance." Before Marcus could reply, the chamber lights dimmed. A new transmission cut across the council floor, overriding every security barrier. Static flickered, then cleared. The image filled the air, dozens of alien warships arrayed in formation, weapons glowing hot as they prepared to fire into a swirling void. The feed was live, every detail sharp. Counselors leaned forward, their voices hushed. The void shifted. From within came something vast, coiling with impossible speed. Metal shredded like paper. Fire bloomed across the stars. Ships detonated one by one as claws the size of frigates tore through their hulls. The Predator moved faster than thought, its body a blur of armor and shadow. In less than a minute, the entire armada was gone, scattered wreckage tumbling into silence. And then the thing turned. For a breathless instant, its massive head filled the view, eyes burning with a light like collapsing stars. It stared into the transmission feed itself as though it knew the council was watching. Across the chamber, hundreds froze. A dozen fainted. Someone screamed. But the Predator did not advance. It drifted backward into the void and was gone. The transmission cut. Silence fell so absolute it seemed the chamber had been emptied of air. Elias stood slowly, the sound of his boots echoing far louder than they should have. His gaze swept the gathered counselors, none of whom could meet his eyes. It had them. It destroyed them. And still it turned away. He paused, letting the weight of the moment press against them. "Tell me again it doesn't reason. Tell me again it doesn't choose." No one answered. Marcus rose beside him, his face unreadable but his stance braced for the storm that was sure to come. The silence of the council was not agreement, it was dread. They would call for war regardless. They always did. But as Elias looked into the void where the hollow had been, he felt the faintest flicker of something the others could not imagine. The Predator had looked back. And it had not looked at them all. It had looked at him. The council did not trust him, but Elias had known that before he spoke. Their silence had been heavy, their eyes filled with suspicion and loathing. To them he was already guilty of sympathy for the monster. Yet Elias did not waste his time arguing further. Words would not stop what was coming, and he had seen enough in that broadcast to convince him of one thing. If anyone was to understand the Predator, it had to be him. So he went to his superiors on Earth and offered something no one else dared. A reconnaissance mission. Not from afar, not by drones or automated probes that the Predator swatted away like insects. He would go himself. His request was met with silence at first, then quiet horror, then, inevitably, approval. Humanity was not yet powerful enough to resist the Council's pressure, but it had not yet bowed its neck either. If Elias was willing to walk into the lion's den, they would let him. And if he did not come back, Earth would call him a hero who sacrificed himself for knowledge. The ship chosen was small, lean, and built for stealth. It was not a warship but a scout corvette, stripped of unnecessary weight, its engines tuned for speed and silence. As it prepared for launch, Elias walked the deck, his boots ringing faintly against the steel. He memorized every sound, every vibration. A soldier's ritual, though he wore no armor now. Marcus Hale was already aboard, standing near the navigation console. He looked up as Elias approached, his mouth pulling into a sharp grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I still can't decide if you're brave or suicidal," he said. "Neither," Elias replied. "Just tired of watching the galaxy make the same mistakes." Marcus shook his head but followed him all the same. Loyalty was not something he ever needed to explain. The two men had served together long enough to understand each other without words, their bond forged not in grand speeches but in the quiet certainty that the other would always stand when it mattered. The launch was silent, their ship slipping free of the docks with no fanfare. They did not announce their mission to the Council, though Elias knew the spies would follow soon enough. He hoped, perhaps foolishly, that by the time the rest of the galaxy noticed, he would have answers they could not ignore. The journey took them into the dark frontier, where human colonies hung like scattered beads of light against the abyss. Out here, the stars seemed sharper, the silence deeper. Every officer aboard felt it, the weight of being prey in a place that belonged to something else. On the third day, the first sign appeared. A distortion in the void, faint at first, like a ripple across glass. Sensors struggled to parse it. The crew shifted nervously at their stations. Marcus leaned forward, eyes narrowing at the screen. "That's not a natural anomaly," he muttered. Elias studied the distortion, his voice calm though his pulse quickened. "No. It's watching." And then the ripple became form. It moved with impossible speed, slipping from shadow into being as though the void itself had decided to take shape. The predator was vast, its body both beast and machine in appearance, armored plates glinting like obsidian, its silhouette shifting between forms the human eye could barely hold. Its eyes, twin stars burning with alien light, fixed directly on their ship. The crew froze. Fingers hovered above controls, breaths caught in throats. Every instinct screamed to run, to fire, to do something. But Elias raised a hand. "No weapons. Not unless I give the order." His command cut through the rising panic. Slowly, his officers forced themselves to obey. The predator drew closer, its size dwarfing their corvette until they felt like a speck before a storm. Its claws scraped across nothingness, a motion that seemed both graceful and lethal. The ship trembled as though the very fabric of space bent around it. And then it stopped. Elias unstrapped from his chair, ignoring the hiss of warning from Marcus. He walked to the observation deck, standing before the reinforced glass as though it were nothing more than air. The predator's head loomed beyond, vast enough to eclipse stars. He lifted his hand, open, unarmed. For a long moment there was only silence. Then a sound, not sound exactly but vibration, a resonance that bypassed ears and pressed directly into the mind. It was not words, not language, but emotion. Elias staggered beneath the weight of it, not from fear but from the intensity. Loneliness, hunger, yearning, a desperate need to belong. Elias gritted his teeth, grounding himself against the storm of sensation. The predator's gaze never wavered, its burning eyes fixed on him as though measuring his worth. Behind him, Marcus muttered, his voice tight with disbelief. It's not attacking." "No," Elias whispered. His hand remained steady. "It's choosing." The predator lowered its head, a movement so massive it sent ripples through the void. The armored plates along its jaw shifted, revealing teeth like mountains of obsidian, each capable of rending starships apart. Yet it did not strike. Its head hovered near the glass, close enough that Elias could see the reflection of himself in its eyes. The resonance pulsed again, this time different. Protective. Loyal. Submissive. Elias's throat tightened. He had spent his life studying predators, from wolves to lions, from the primal instincts of Earth's beasts to the complex strategies of alien lifeforms. And this, the most feared being in the galaxy, was lowering its head the way a wolf might to its alpha. He lowered his hand slowly, pressing his palm against the glass. The predator rumbled, a sound that rolled through the ship's hull, shaking every rivet. Yet it was not a growl of threat. It was acknowledgement. Acceptance. The crew stood frozen, unable to comprehend what they were seeing. Marcus stepped forward beside Elias, his face pale but his voice steady. "You realize what this means, don't you?" Elias nodded, eyes never leaving the creature. "It means it's not our enemy. Not unless we force it to be." The silence that followed was heavy, filled with unspoken fear and awe. Every instinct told them they stood one mistake away from annihilation. Yet the moment stretched, unbroken, as the predator lingered like a shadow given flesh, waiting for something only Elias could give. Finally, Elias stepped back from the glass. The predator mirrored the motion, retreating slightly, its eyes still fixed on him. "Log this encounter," Elias ordered quietly. "Every detail." One of the officers stammered, "Captain, what do we call it in the report?" Elias hesitated. To the council it was extinction incarnate. To the galaxy a nightmare. But here now it felt like something else. "Call it what they always have," he said at last. "The predator. For now." The ship drifted, and the creature drifted with it, no longer as hunter and prey but as something far stranger. Elias could not name it yet, but deep down he knew this was not the end. It was the beginning. When the crew finally moved, they did so in silence, each of them shaken to their core. Marcus lingered by the captain's side, his jaw tight, his eyes flicking between Elias and the void where the predator hovered. "You're in over your head," Marcus said quietly. "And so am I. But if that thing really has chosen you, then God help the rest of us." Elias did not answer. His gaze was still fixed on the dark beyond, where the most feared being in the galaxy floated like a sentinel waiting for command. And for the first time in his life he felt the future shift beneath his feet, not because of fleets or weapons but because a monster had looked into him and seen something it needed. The transmission they would eventually send back to Earth would not capture this moment. Words could not. Reports could not. But Elias knew the council would not wait to hear his interpretation. They would see this encounter as proof of danger, proof that humanity courted disaster. They would brand him reckless, dangerous, perhaps even a traitor. But none of that mattered. The predator had looked at him. And it had not seen prey. It had seen its guardian. The predator lingered near their ship for hours, shadowing every maneuver as though tethered by an invisible thread. It did not crowd them, did not strike, but its presence was inescapable. Every heartbeat of the crew seemed to echo against its silence. Elias stood on the observation deck through most of it, his eyes fixed on the creature, his body still and measured as if any sudden movement might shatter the fragile balance they had found. Marcus paced behind him, unable to match his captain's calm. "You do realize we're practically tethered to a goddamn nightmare, right?" he muttered. "The crew's at breaking point. They won't hold much longer with that thing staring at us." Elias didn't turn. His reflection in the glass was a thin silhouette beside the vast form beyond. "They'll hold," he said. "They're soldiers. And deep down they already understand what this means. Fear can be endured when it comes with purpose." Marcus gave a short laugh without humor. "Purpose? That thing's been wiping fleets for centuries. You think it's here to be our pet?" Elias's eyes flicked to him then, sharp and unwavering. "Not a pet. But it's not mindless. It has instincts. And instincts can be understood." The ship continued its slow drift, and the predator followed like a great beast trailing a smaller animal, curious but not hostile. At one point it surged forward, brushing so close to the hull that metal groaned under the pressure of its passage. Several officers cried out, alarms blaring, but then the creature pulled away again with deliberate restraint. Almost a test. Almost play. By the time they set course for the nearest human colony, the crew had moved from raw terror to a strange, trembling awe. They had lived through what no fleet had survived. They had stood under the eyes of the galaxy's nightmare and lived to tell it. And beneath the weight of that knowledge was something more dangerous: pride. The colony they approached was small, a scattering of domes and towers built along the ridge of a desert world. As the corvette entered orbit, communications lit up with urgent signals. Colonists had seen the predator in the sky. Panic raced through the streets, civilians scrambling to shelters, planetary defenses charging weapons that would do nothing but provoke. "Stand down those defenses," Elias ordered immediately. His command was transmitted to the colony governor before Marcus could question it. "No fire, no provocation. If anyone disobeys, they'll be answering to me." The governor sputtered over the channel, his voice shaking. "Captain, that thing is circling us like prey. You want us to do nothing?" "I want you to survive," Elias said evenly. "And you won't survive by throwing stones at a mountain." The predator descended into atmosphere with a roar of air and fire, its colossal frame blotting out the sun for those below. Streets emptied as it swept over the settlement, its shadow stretching across towers and domes. Children cried, parents pulled them into shelters, soldiers froze at their posts. And yet, not a single weapon fired. Elias stood on the colony's landing platform when it arrived. He had ordered Marcus to stay close, though the lieutenant clearly thought it was madness to be anywhere but underground. The predator landed on the dunes just beyond the perimeter, sand erupting into storms around its claws. Its head lowered, eyes burning, scanning every soul who dared to look back. The silence was unbearable. Then, from somewhere near the shelters, a child slipped free of his mother's grasp. He stumbled onto the open street, eyes wide, pointing at the colossal shape. His voice rang out with simple awe. "It's huge, like a shadow wolf." The name caught in the air. Others whispered it, hesitant, almost reverent. Shadowfang. The terror of the stars, suddenly given a name fit for a story rather than a nightmare. The predator's eyes flicked toward the child. For a terrible instant, no one breathed. Then it lowered its head, closer, its vast body folding down until it rested against the sand. The gesture was unmistakable, not a strike, but submission. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The fear that had strangled them cracked, replaced by confusion, wonder, even disbelief. Soldiers lowered their weapons without meaning to. The mother seized her son and fled, but the image remained burned into every mind, extinction incarnate bowing before a human child. Marcus leaned close to Elias, his voice tight. "Do you see what's happening? They'll never believe this on the council. They'll call it manipulation or madness. They'll say we're colluding with it." "They already think that," Elias replied. His gaze never left the beast, his tone quiet but certain. "But what they won't admit is that they're afraid. Not of the predator. Of us. Because if it listens to humanity, if it chooses us, then the balance of power shifts forever. The predator remained near the colony, watching, waiting, never attacking. Days passed. Civilians returned to their routines, though they cast nervous glances skyward whenever the shadow moved. Children dared each other to approach the dunes where it lay, though soldiers held them back. Farmers in the outer fields reported that the beast scared away every raider and wild creature for miles, leaving them safer than they had ever been. But safety bred tension as much as fear. Reports spread across the stars. Council spies disguised as traitors sent transmissions back to their masters, describing the impossible sight of humanity standing unscathed beneath the monster's gaze. It did not take long for judgment to fall. The message arrived on the fourth night, sealed with the insignia of the Galactic Council. Elias read it alone at first, his jaw tightening with each line. Marcus found him in the command dome afterward, standing stiffly with the datapad in his hand. "They've branded us enemies," Elias said quietly. "Effective immediately. They call it treason. They claim humanity is harboring a galactic threat." Marcus swore under his breath, pacing like a caged animal. "Of course they did. They can't control it, so they'll control the story instead. You know what comes next? Fleets. Sanctions. Blockades. They'll burn this colony to ash just to prove they can." Elias's hand curled around the datapad until his knuckles whitened. "They'll try. But the predator isn't leaving. It's chosen to stay here. And if they come, it will fight." Marcus stared at him, then shook his head slowly. "You're talking about unleashing that thing on the entire council. Do you know what that means? Billions will die." "I know." Elias's voice was low, weighted with the truth. He turned toward the observation window, where in the distance Shadowfang lay coiled like a mountain of steel and bone. "That's why we have to make it trust us. That's why it has to understand restraint." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant rumble as the creature shifted on the dunes. For the first time, Marcus saw not just awe in Elias's expression, but responsibility. The burden of command had never looked heavier. Finally Marcus exhaled, his voice grudging but loyal. "If you're going to do this, then I'm with you. But understand something, Elias. If this goes wrong, there won't be anyone left to forgive us." Elias nodded once, his eyes still locked on the beast beyond. "Then we'll make sure it doesn't go wrong." Outside, Shadowfang stirred, lifting its head toward the sky as though it sensed the fleets already mobilizing beyond the horizon. Its eyes glowed brighter, a silent promise etched in light. And though the colony slept uneasily beneath its shadow, one truth had already taken root. The predator was no longer the galaxy's terror. It was humanity's, and the galaxy would come for them both. The colony had grown quieter, though never calm. People lived under the constant awareness that a monster, protector or not, waited just beyond their fields. Farmers still planted, miners still dug, children still ran through corridors, but every sound was tinged with unease. At night the dunes glowed faintly as Shadowfang shifted its colossal body, the air vibrating with its rumbling breaths. Its presence was both a shield and a burden. To some, it was salvation. To others, a promise of destruction delayed only by the whim of a beast. Elias Ward walked the colony's perimeter wall each dawn, the horizon a line of gold where the desert met the sky. He had become a figure both feared and revered, the man who had spoken with the predator and survived. Soldiers saluted him stiffly, civilians whispered his name as though invoking it would keep them safe. Yet in council meetings with the governor and militia captains, he was met with suspicion. They obeyed his orders, but their eyes carried doubt. Marcus was never far from him. The lieutenant had grown sharper these past weeks, his restless energy honed into vigilance. He was the first to note supply shortages, the first to catch hints of sabotage, the first to predict that spies had already embedded themselves among the traders who came and went. "They're watching us," Marcus told him bluntly one evening. "Every shipment, every transmission. The council won't wait forever. They're just gathering excuses." Elias had only nodded. He had been expecting the storm. The message arrived at last, carried on a public channel that the entire colony could hear. It was not an invitation to negotiate. It was an ultimatum. Humanity was accused of harboring a galactic threat. If they did not surrender Shadowfang for extermination, they would be treated as collaborators, stripped of their rights as a member race, and targeted as an enemy of all. The word spread like fire. Colonists filled the streets, some shouting in defiance, others crying in fear. Fights broke out between those who believed Shadowfang had saved them and those who feared it would bring annihilation. The governor demanded Elias drive the creature away before the fleets arrived. The militia whispered about mutiny. And still the predator remained on the dunes, watching, unmoving, as though waiting for Elias alone. In the command dome, the two men argued late into the night. "They're going to come," Marcus said, leaning over the table where star maps glowed with red markers. "Not patrol fleets. Not scouts. An armada. You've seen the reports, councils pulling ships from half their sectors. They're not planning to scare us, Elias. They're planning to erase us." Elias stood with his arms crossed, staring at the map. His face was calm, but his eyes burned with thought. "Then we prepare. Not to win, at least not in the way they expect. We don't need Shadowfang to slaughter them. We need to show them it can choose mercy. That's the only way the galaxy survives this." Marcus barked a harsh laugh. "Mercy? You think the same bastards who voted to brand us traitors are going to care if the monster spares a few ships? They'll spin it however they want. They'll never accept it as anything but a threat." Elias met his gaze with a rare steel. "Then we make them accept it? The predator is not the danger, it's the proof. Proof that humanity can command loyalty even from what they fear most. That's what terrifies them." The silence between them was heavy, broken only by the hum of the table. At last Marcus exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. "God help me, Elias, but I'll follow you. Just know this. If Shadowfang decides otherwise, if it stops listening, then none of us walk away." When the armada came, it blotted out the stars. The first ships appeared as faint points of light, then swelled into monstrous shapes, hundreds of warships cresting over the desert sky as though the heavens themselves had cracked open. Civilians flooded into shelters, soldiers manned defenses they knew were useless, and every screen in the colony filled with the image of engines burning against the night. Shadowfang rose from the dunes like a mountain pulled upright, its body unfolding into the air, wings of armored flesh stretching until they blocked the sun. The air shook with its roar, a sound that froze blood and rattled bones. But it did not leap to attack. It waited. Its head lowered toward Elias, who stood on the platform as if he alone tethered it to restraint. The council fleet gave no warning. They opened fire in a storm of light and thunder, beams lancing down from orbit, missiles streaking through the atmosphere. The colony trembled under the onslaught. Domes shattered, towers cracked, and fire filled the streets. Shadowfang moved. It rose like a storm given form, intercepting the missiles in a flurry of claws, its armored hide deflecting beams that could have cracked continents. It tore through the first wave of ships with terrifying ease, but each time it had the chance to finish them, Elias signaled restraint. Again and again the creature hesitated, snarling but veering away, allowing crippled ships to flee rather than crushing them utterly. The spectacle was unlike anything the galaxy had seen. A monster long feared as extinction incarnate now fought with a kind of brutal discipline, its destruction guided by human command. For every ship shattered, another was spared, left limping back into the void as proof that this was not slaughter but choice. In the command dome, Marcus directed ground forces to protect fleeing civilians. His voice was a constant growl of orders, his hands steady even as the floor shook with impacts. "Get those transports moving. Keep the militia off the streets. Our fight isn't with civilians. Ward, if that thing pulls back, we're finished." Elias stood at the window, his hand pressed against the glass, his gaze locked with Shadowfang's as if the entire war hinged on the invisible tether between them. "Hold," he whispered into the calm, though the words were meant for no one but the beast. "Show them. Show them you can choose." For a time it worked. The fleets faltered, their formations breaking under the weight of both losses and confusion. They had expected a mindless force of destruction, not a monster sparing enemies at a human signal. The balance of fear began to shift. But then the council revealed its final card. At the edge of the system, a shape emerged, colossal, angular, bristling with weapons that dwarfed anything the fleet had deployed. It was not a warship but a weapon, a planet killer designed in secret, forged from the united resources of half the council races. Energy built along its spine, a growing sun aimed not at Shadowfang but at Earth itself. The chamber fell silent as sensors confirmed the target. Marcus's voice dropped to a whisper, flat and cold. "They're not trying to win. They're trying to end us." Elias felt the words like a knife. Every calculation, every plan for restraint, every argument of mercy, none of it mattered if the planet itself was erased. He looked out to the dunes, where Shadowfang's eyes blazed with fury as it turned toward the weapon. Its body coiled, its claws flexed, and for the first time Elias saw not restraint but the unbound promise of annihilation. He closed his eyes, exhaling once, the weight of command pressing down like a mountain. "Marcus," he said quietly, "get me a line to every ship in orbit. Human and council both. They need to see what happens next." Marcus stared at him, then nodded sharply, moving to the console. The comm crackled, channels opening across the system, voices of dozens of languages hissing and overlapping. The Predator roared, a sound that carried across every feed, vibrating in the bones of those who listened. The weapon charged brighter, its energy gathering into a beam that could unmake a world. Shadowfang spread its wings, the desert trembling beneath it. And Elias Ward stood at the window, knowing the next moments would decide not only humanity's fate, but the fate of the galaxy itself. The skies above burned with fire, the fleets poised between retreat and slaughter, the world below trembling in fear. The war had reached its precipice, and the choice was no longer the Council's to make. It was Shadowfang's. Under the glow of alien starlight, the final act of humanity's strange guardianship unfolded. Kale stood at the threshold of the Council chamber, the massive apex predator at his side. Srath no longer crouched like a beast dragged in chains. He strode tall, his eyes burning with a clarity that unsettled every elder in the chamber. The predator's muscles rippled with restrained power, but what startled the assembly more than his size was the way his gaze softened only when it shifted toward the human standing beside him. In a galaxy that had once trembled at his name, Srath now carried himself not as a weapon but as something unthinkably dangerous, a creature with choice. The chamber was packed, a theater of judgment masked as politics. Dozens of alien delegates whispered in nervous tones, their voices trembling. To them, the predator had been extinction incarnate, a nightmare given flesh. And now the very human who had once been dismissed as fragile, Kale, with his ordinary frame and stubborn defiance, had somehow become the predator's anchor. It was not simply unorthodox, it was heresy. Yet here they stood, summoned to answer for what the galaxy perceived as an unforgivable transgression, the taming of terror itself. The High Arbiter's voice rang sharp through the vaulted hall. "Kale Varus. Srath the Devourer. You stand accused of fracturing the balance of galactic law. No predator, no matter how bound, may be permitted sanctuary among the vulnerable." His tone sharpened as his eyes swept toward Kale. "And you, human, have broken precedent, endangering every world by binding yourself to this aberration." Kale didn't flinch. He had endured worse than rhetoric. His voice, calm but edged with fire, carried across the hall. "You see a beast because you have only ever known fear. But fear blinds. What you call aberration is a mind, thinking, choosing, capable of loyalty. Srath is no longer your terror. He is my guardian and by extension humanity's. You condemn what you do not understand." A low rumble built from Srath's chest, not a growl but something akin to words struggling through a throat made for killing. The translator at his neck crackled before spitting out halting syllables. "Not beast. Not chained. Chose, human." The sound echoed like thunder and silence followed. Delegates stared wide-eyed, some recoiling, others leaning forward as though beholding the impossible. A creature bred for annihilation was speaking not threats but allegiance. The High Arbiter's gaze flicked from predator to human, visibly unsettled though his voice remained steady. Even if he has chosen, the risk remains. Can a blade ever truly cease to cut? Can death incarnate be anything but death? Kale's jaw tightened. He stepped closer to Srath, his hand brushing the thick hide of the predator's arm. The gesture was almost casual, but in the chamber it looked like madness. A fragile human touching a living apocalypse with unthinking familiarity. "A blade in the wrong hands destroys," Kale said, voice hardening. "In the right hands it defends. If you cannot see the difference, then perhaps it isn't the predator who is blind but the council." A ripple of whispers broke the silence, some outraged, others contemplative. Srath's golden eyes swept the chamber, reading the tension like prey scent on the wind. He could feel the pulse of fear, but beneath it lingered something else, curiosity. For the first time in uncounted cycles, the galaxy was watching him not with certainty of what he was, but with doubt. Doubt that perhaps they had always been wrong. The Arbiter raised his hand, but before he could speak, alarms shrieked through the hall. The chamber's walls trembled. A voice over the intercom cried, "Unknown fleet approaching, war signatures detected. Shields compromised." The delegates panicked, some scrambling, others shouting commands. The galaxy's ruling chamber, built to project absolute control, had been breached. Kale's instincts sharpened. He recognized the signature on the holoscreen that flickered to life. vessels belonging to the old alliance of warlords who had once unleashed Srath as their weapon. They had come not for negotiation but reclamation. To them, Srath was no sentient ally. He was property, a living arsenal that had slipped the leash. And now they wanted him back. The council guards mobilized, but their weapons seemed feeble against the storm descending outside. Kale turned to Srath, meeting the predator's unflinching gaze. "This is your choice," Kale said, voice steady. "Run, fight, or let them take you back. But whatever you choose, it's yours." Srath's chest expanded, a sound like an earthquake escaping his throat. The translator crackled again. "I choose. Stand. With human." He stepped forward, claws flexing, and for the first time, the galaxy saw what true allegiance looked like, not obedience forced by fear but loyalty born of will. The chamber trembled again, not from the ships outside, but from the roar that ripped through Srath's throat, a declaration to friend and foe alike. He was no longer theirs to command. What followed was chaos. The warlord fleet breached the city's defenses, fire raining across the skyline. Kale and Srath moved as one, man and predator, fragile and indomitable. Srath tore through armored intruders like a living storm, yet his every motion orbited Kale, protecting, shielding, striking only when Kale's sharp commands or subtle gestures directed him. Delegates who had once spat contempt now watched, stunned, as the nightmare they had feared became their savior. The predator fought not for dominance, not for carnage, but for a single human whose courage had defied the galaxy's verdict. Hours seemed to compress into minutes, a frenzy of survival and defiance. When the last of the invaders were cast down, the council chamber lay in ruins, smoke curling through shattered glass, blood streaking the marble floors. Kale leaned heavily against a broken pillar, his body battered but unyielding. Srath loomed beside him, scarred but unbroken, golden eyes still lit with fire. The silence that followed was heavier than any roar. One by one, delegates rose to their feet, not in defiance but in acknowledgement. The High Arbiter, shaken, could barely mask the tremor in his voice. "The galaxy owes you both its survival. Perhaps we have misjudged what is possible." Kale's lips curled into a grim smile, though his voice was iron. "You didn't misjudge. You never judged at all. You feared. And fear has cost this galaxy too much. Srath is no terror. He is proof that choice, not chains, defines us." Srath lowered his massive frame, crouching until his head was level with Kale's. The predator's voice, halting yet clear, filled the hall. "Together. Guardian. Human, and predator." His clawed hand extended, and Kale gripped it without hesitation, sealing a pact that no law, no council, no warlord could ever break. The chamber erupted, not in panic but in thunderous applause, a sound alien and raw in a place built for politics. The council had not only witnessed survival, they had witnessed transformation. The galaxy's greatest terror had chosen its place not as destroyer, but as guardian, and its chosen bond was with humanity. Later, when the fires cooled and the ruins were cleared, stories spread like wildfire through the stars. Tales of how the predator that had once been extinction incarnate had stood beside a human, not as master and beast but as equals. On distant worlds, children whispered the name Srath not with terror but with awe. And wherever Kale walked, the shadow of his towering companion sent a message sharper than any blade. Humanity had not tamed terror, they had earned its loyalty. In the end, the galaxy did not simply accept this bond. They feared it still, respected it deeply, and whispered of it endlessly. Yet they could not deny it. From that day forward, the apex predator no longer stood alone as a symbol of annihilation. He stood with humanity, and in that union the galaxy glimpsed something far more terrifying than extinction. The unstoppable force of choice, wielded not by fear but by trust. And for Kale and Srath that was enough. Their story was not an end, but a beginning, one written not in chains, but in loyalty strong enough to shake empires. A human and a predator bound not by law or fear, but by the most dangerous power in the universe, freedom.